What's going on, everybody? I should have coffee with me. My apologies. No coffee, just analytics, just thoughts. You probably have coffee or booze or something. This is your opportunity to listen to me provide insights into things that I've seen throughout the last month. So, as we look back on April, the big highlight from this focus, or the focus from this month's Coffee and Analytics, is instability. If you go on LinkedIn, I think it's a fantastic tool to use. Up in the right corner, you'll see trending news. And oftentimes it's talking about things that affect the economy because people tend to want to talk about this. Now, in franchising, this is your biggest opportunity when people talk about the economy or their shakiness or turbulence. Most people listen to that and start thinking and contemplating about their own life and what is the potential value that they currently have in their careers or their jobs or in their franchises, and they start thinking about opportunities to make adjustments. I've said this many times before. Franchising works counter to economic conditions. So when things are really good, franchisees aren't going to buy as frequently because they're risk averse. I mean, when you buy a franchise, you're investing your life savings into a business that you have little to no control over, and most likely have left a career or a job to get into that position of being a franchisee. And so you think about what that trigger moment is. Typically, it is done for you. There's shakiness in the economy, therefore you sense there's a layoff coming. Therefore, you look at your financial bandwidth, and therefore you make a jump. You're looking at your career. There might be you might be stuck. You're not going to be able to move up because the person above you owns that seat. So the opportunity is not large. Therefore, you look at making a jump. And so we think through this instability in the economy, and most of us look at that as a bad thing. Like if we're at a cocktail reception and we're talking about what is and what isn't working in franchising, we might say, well, there's a lot of shakiness in the economy. Yes, but that's your big opportunity as a franchisor, is to push down the pedal and use this as a growth. It's a catapult your growth, because you start showing how can you add stability back to the franchise owner should they make the leap and get into business for themselves. Oftentimes the saying is get into business for yourself, not by yourself. Obviously, you can elevate that up or lift up that message. Make sure you're giving scaffolding to the franchisee, which is why we've talked about support so many times in these discussions. When you can clearly showcase how you truly support the franchisee, now all of a sudden you build a little bit more confidence or comfort in them as they're taking their approach to how do I get into a business setting. So with risk comes opportunity, especially for those buying. And so what we ended up doing this month, as you know, we profile all these franchisees typically around the signing or the opening, and we take an aggregate of all this data to try to give you guys an insight on what can you use to impact your franchise development activities. And so this month we dove into what are the concerns that the buyer has, and then how can you overcome it. So what I did is I took the last month, which was April's findings, I compiled it into categories. So first, let me start with the themes. Out of a bunch of franchisees, again, these are ones who have opened or signed. We said, what is the thing that could have stumped you or stopped you from buying a franchise? And the themes from April were operations. Two people talked about operations. That how does the operations of the business actually work, and how can I fit into that? Four people brought up uncertainty, that they are concerned about the economy, which my viewpoint is when there's uncertainty in the buying process, you're really not buying against uncertainty today in the economy. You're actually buying for uncertainty in 6 to 12 months from now when you get open. If I go backwards to COVID, some of the best franchisees that we see that are actually staying pretty true to their development schedules and scaling at the pace that they should, bought during COVID with the mindset that after they have to find real estate, if they have to get in to a physical brick and mortar, that by the time they find the real estate, by the time they get through construction, by the time they get open, we should be in a different place from an economics situation. And therefore, when they open, they're actually going to open in better scenarios. And when they they buy on opportunity because maybe there was some cost savings in some of the construction. Now, when you're buying in futures, there's a lot of unpredictability. So if you're buying this year, you're buying in May of 2023. We're heading into an election year. Election year tends to remain somewhat turbulent. So if you're looking at a stretch of a year, then you just got to be prepared from how much reserve capital do I have? You have to be prepared to maybe leverage some of that to get you through some of the headwinds that might come up in 24. So the uncertainty, while it's a theme, there were 4 people that talked about being uncertain of the opportunity. It still remains as a viable opportunity if you're looking at the timeline of when you actually get open. Restrictions. Now that this seems to make sense to me, when you're buying a franchise, there are restrictions. What can you do and can't you do within the guidelines of a franchise? This does create hesitation. So how do you answer that as a franchisee or a franchisor? We'll get into. Fear of failing. This had 5 responses that address this, that what if I fail? This one's always interesting to me because as a franchisor, I want the candidate coming to the table saying, I'm going to be number 1 in the system. As it relates to item 19, I'm always a little bit hesitant when I hear someone talk about the average. Like, what is your average unit volume? Great insight. It's a good check mark to have, but ultimately, I'm looking at something bigger than that. If I'm buying into a franchise, the question is, how do I become number 1? And what does number 1 do? And what was their pathway? And how much time did it take for them to get the momentum going? I'd rather focus on the top quartile because I want to be a great franchisee. Now, when you have a fear of failing, in my opinion, does franchising help offset failure in business? Yeah, if you take the right approach to buying a franchise, sure. Now, if you're buying an emerging brand that is carving out a new category, not a lot of competition, marketing, whatever the product or service is there a higher chance of failing? Yeah. All that means is you have to have more operating capital in the reserves to be able to leverage in order to find success. So this fear of failure is something that obviously building content and support around is very important. The unknown, what's going to happen in the economy, what's going to happen in my business came up, not as heavily as failing or the fear of failure, but it did come up of what are the unknowns of franchising. And what you're starting to see here, operations uncertainty, restrictions, failing, and the unknown as the first five buckets. Like, this is all things that franchising does solve for the most part. Operations, we've built a structure that we're obviously duplicating. Operations are down. Uncertainty, we've already trek through the mud to figure out what works and what doesn't in the business. We've been through multiple economic scenarios. We've looked through COVID, battled through COVID, got to the other side of it. Restrictions, here's how we have a franchise advisory council that actually helps provide some insight or guidance into what we should do as a business. So we do listen to our franchisees. Failing, here are franchisees that maybe got into the system thinking about fear of failure. Here's how they've overcome that, and here's what they learned throughout their process. The unknown obviously fits into the last bucket. Other one was financial. We've talked about this. The buyer journey is fairly simplistic. What's the vision of the business? What's the point of differentiation on the product? Validation, where you're growing. Those are the baselines. And then the financial side is how much does it cost to get in and how much can I make? And so if you're qualifying a candidate that can barely put together enough capital to buy into your business, then you have to understand and be comfortable with the fact that you are also taking a crapshoot on that candidate, because if they're not financially sound, then when some of the honeymoon periods end or there's turbulence in their books, that's where some of those fears happen, and that's where they want to just hand back their keys and say I'm out. So the financial side, this came up 8 times in April. That ends up being a big concern. What's the future for and my family? The fees, The value of the fees. Value of fees, I think, is an important one and super important in today's world, where much of the broker community, not wrong by them, but they've said, here, you want to get deals from me, you're going to have to pay. And you're obviously paying for performance because the broker has executed a deal or handed you over a deal that's going to turn. But what has happened is the franchise fees have skyrocketed, and now the value of those fees is being questioned. So, what is the value of the technology fee? What's the value of the royalty? What's the value of the franchise fee? I think that's very important to answer. I've shared with this a year ago. I went through a process of looking at a franchise with a friend of mine, where we went through the entire start to finish, got through discovery day. And that was one of my concerns. I would say above all that, I wasn't worried about operations. That's easy. I didn't have uncertainty about it. Restrictions I didn't care about. Fear of failing, wasn't worried about that. The unknown, I know franchising. Financial, qualified, ready to go there. Future and family, on impacts of my family, not an issue for me. But the value of the fees ended up going skyrocket for me, in that I wanted to know, what did supply chain look like how much, when I'm paying a big fee, how much have you engineered to make this business sound for me? I'm paying a technology cost. What's the true support from a technology standpoint? What are you going to do for my royalty? What are you doing as a business owner to get things going? And ultimately, that's where I got hung up, and I advised my friend not to move forward with that opportunity. The economy came up 3 times. We've kind of talked about that. Royalties, sustainable territory. It only came up once, but something obviously someone was thinking about. And then the competition. How do we beat the competition? Usually beat the competition by out marketing them and out operating them. So these are the themes that came up throughout the month. Now, what I also did, if you've read my note, I also broke down some of these concerns so that you can actually have the deliverable that you have to go and create, or have our team create on your behalf. So the cost and risk that comes with owning a restaurant. This was the fear, and this is obviously a position for a restaurant brand, but the cost and risk that comes with owning insert brand. Said highlight franchisees who felt the same but are scaling. And I said this in some of my opening notes or remarks here, that usually the counterpiece is found in franchisees that have overcome that hurdle. Oftentimes it is. And so if you go back to your existing franchisees, which, by the way, is your biggest asset when it comes to franchise development, you have people that have already said yes to you, leverage them. So highlight franchisees who felt the same but are scaling. Why insert name continues to invest, open more locations with insert brand. I think this is one of the most important elements of sustained franchise development, is that franchisees who are already in the system are continuing to scale. What does that mean? That means they know the secret. There's a lot more to their story than can be disclosed in an item 19. They know the secrets. They're willing to talk about the secrets, because if they validate the business, they're validating it through purely opening continued locations. And if they're opening more locations, it goes back to why a multi-unit operator ends up getting into these businesses, is how do I scale this? I'm an operator of the widget, but my widget ends up being franchising, and ultimately, if I can get to scale, keep buying at a steady pace, knowing what the cost to get in is and how much I can make is, then all of a sudden they're going to continue to push down the pedal until they're told no. And then when they're told no, or there's no more room to grow in that market, then they say, okay, what other brands exist? And they put their widget to work, or their model against a widget to work again. So you should have in your arsenal why insert name continues to invest, open more locations with insert brand. Do you have that? Do you have a piece that talks about a scaling franchisee? If you don't, put that on your to-do list for what you need to create in the next month. Creative control, micromanaging, and finance. This came up as well. Creative control. No, you do not have creative control. I said this one's a little bit tougher, as creative control doesn't overly exist in franchising. The franchisee bought into a restaurant, so perhaps there can be some in that scenario if the franchisee bought into a restaurant, because maybe you've created some sort of bendability in the menu that allows a franchisee to localize one of their items. But when you're talking about creative control and feeling micromanaged and the financing that comes alongside this, I mean, that's part of what franchising is. Like, if I'm a franchisee and I'm going to pay $30, $40, $50,000 into owning that franchise, in my opinion, I don't want to divert from their plan. I'm buying a model that I have come to the table thinking works. And I think that's, if a franchisee gets hung up on the creative control, I don't think franchising is right for that person, which, a whole nother topic of being willing to say no to someone who might not be the right person is a whole nother thing. But in that scenario, if they're coming to the table with how much creative control do I have, that would concern me as the seller. So the piece that you want to create there is how Insert Brand encourages idea exchanges with franchisees, and a lot of the time this can be done in a franchise advisory council. So if you don't have one and you're sizable enough, that might be something that you put into place. Before I did my research, I didn't think it was a model that anyone could succeed in. Okay, so that's a big deal. So the takeaway there is how Insert Brand operationalized Insert product to be scalable and ideal for franchising. But before I did my research, I didn't think it was a model that just anyone could succeed at. Meaning, let's say it's in the restaurant space. That's an easy one. So if it's in the restaurant space, I might have a feeling that because I don't have restaurant experience, I would fail at this business. But the reality is, if you've put the scaffolding in that scenario to help offset some of the gaps that someone would have when coming to the table, then maybe you can answer some of that structural stuff. So I think that's super, super important in this model. The investment, you're taking the risk of, what if it doesn't go well? Yeah, I mean, that's a natural thought. So you would answer that by saying how the best product, how to best protect your investment through franchising. And so it's a huge opportunity for you to lift this up and say, well, actually franchising helps offset what if this doesn't go well. And I said sometimes a general piece on what franchising is can be very, very valuable in the sales process. So let's take that as a to-do and put this over to the side. Candidate inquires, they filled out the form. Email 1 is obviously, how do we get them on the phone? But email 2 might be, hey, we just want to give you a little bit of general information on what franchising is and what franchising means to us, why we've taken that approach and how we've made it work. And so now in the buyer journey, you're giving them a piece or an asset that can help drive them to feeling comfortable with the idea of becoming a franchisee. So if you're taking the chance of, oh, well, what if it doesn't go well? Is franchising a guarantee? No, not at all. It's nowhere near a guarantee. It's still a risk. Any business is. But sometimes if you jump off the ledge and you take a risk in business, that jump ends up feeling really, really good because you've made the jump. It might add more time and flexibility in the initial stages. It might create more scale and wealth in the long-term scenario. And depending on what your goal is as a franchise owner, if Insert Brand can help you drive to that, whatever that dream is, and make it come true, then there could be something really attractive about joining a franchise or getting into franchising. And that's something that you're going to want to have as a part of your model. Inflation and supply chain issues. Makes sense for today, but you're buying for 10 plus years. That's what a franchise agreement ends up being. So this was for a fitness franchise. And so you want to have a story on how economy shifts throughout your tenure as a franchisee. Like, let them know that, yes, is today turbulent? Sure, stock market is showing that it's turbulent, but that's not going to be like that in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years. And the flows that are going to happen will impact you greatly up and down. And that's why you prepare for rainy days. And that's why you push down the pedal when things are good. Oftentimes, if I had to call out what is the number one miss with a franchisee, even though you require a marketing spend in your agreement with the franchisee, very often do they live up to it. I don't think it's because they don't want to market their business. I think most of the time it's because you haven't given them a playbook on how to market their business. And if you can show them, like, do X, get Y, do X, get Y, whatever Y is, and Y doesn't have to necessarily always be um, equation back to money. It could also be an indicator that shows that things are moving in the right direction of creating awareness in the marketplace and breaking through. And so inflation, supply chain issues, economy, I would have a point of view on that. And even doing something like this, a pure video where you're answering that question, could have impact back to what you're trying to accomplish from a franchise standpoint. So all of these comments are going against how do we help a franchise buyer overcome their fears? How is our website helping support that? How is our content helping support that? How is our marketing help support that? How is our sales process helping support that? How is our sales team helping support that process? And so we go back there again, just to make this very clear. You want a piece on why franchising, what is franchising? That's one. Two, there is cost and risk that comes alongside opening up your business. But here's an example of a franchisee who is scaling, therefore they know the secret. Here's how we've launched FAC to allow some creative support or consultancy back to the business. How we've built this business for scale and being ideal for franchising. How to protect your investment through franchising, like don't just open up one unit, continue on your growth scale. So the buckets end up building this out, and I said, what is franchising? How we engineered a sound cost profit model, how we operationalize the products and service to be sustainable, how we are different, better than the competition, CEO vision on the economy growth in the next 24 months, and how we support you through operations uncertainties and give you the tools not to fail. And so we take those 6 lines, and now all of a sudden you have a drip campaign. And so you've built out a piece of content that supports each of those headlines that now you automate through your CRM system. So candidate comes in, email 1 ends up being, let's get on the phone. When can we talk about this? Then you go through these educational pieces and then you put them into a long-term drip. So it ends up building an architecture that hopefully you're able to use to help overcome the fears. I do think drip campaigns are overly branded. I don't like getting branded emails because it just feels icky. I want to talk to a sales team that wants to make me feel confident and comfortable in the process, not just feel like automation. I know all the buzz is about AI and what is AI going to do for franchising. AI does not change comfort in the buying process. People do. And so when you can build a relationship with a human being, that still has to be the number one thing. So when it comes to these email campaigns, I don't like them branded. I just like real simple text that's saying, here's a point of view, send it out. Sometimes just, even if you're going to automate it, putting sent from my iPhone ends up adding that other tangible or part to it that makes the candidate feel like this is personable and real back to the person. In everything, every decision that we make, it could be marriage, it could be having children, it could be what college we're going to, it could be, are we going to quit our job? All of these come with risk. Hopefully most of them come with reward. And when we're chasing down what the outcome is that we want in our life, building growth or wealth, or whatever it is, building something to hand off to our family, then sometimes you have to take some of those risks to get that reward. I'm going to leave you with this. I pull things from people that end up inspiring me. And I was listening to a guy, and he talked about the moment right now, right this second. And so pause for a second in this moment and flash forward 20 years from now. So 20 years from now would be 2043. And so we're there. What would you give to jump back into this moment in time? 20 years have passed us by. 20 years have passed us by with our children. 20 years have passed us up with our careers. 20 years have passed us up with our families. 20 years have passed us up in life. So 20 years are gone. What would you give to get back to this moment? And most of us would say just about anything. Give our leg, we would give our business, we would give up anything to get that time back. And that sense of urgency on taking advantage of right now and fighting for what equals happiness for you right now, and fighting for it tomorrow and the day after this and the day after that, that's what we should be encouraging back to franchisees. Like when you sit on the sidelines and you keep waiting, and we can come up with a million reasons why we shouldn't buy a franchise, or why we shouldn't spend to push our franchise right now. There's tons of reasons. But when you get out of your own way and say, look, life is short. We have a 20-year sprint here, and we might not be even doing coffee and analytics 20 years from now. What do we want to do today? And it changes your perspective a little bit. I've talked a lot about this on changing your perspective on what today means to you, and what it can mean to the possibility of what you're trying to accomplish is deeply valuable to the process, whether that's franchising or bigger decisions that are happening in your life. So I would encourage you to try to take a step back, even if it's just today for one moment, and just say, what can I change today to lift up my happiness? I go through this. I think about it often. I want to get to what equals happiness, and I will continue to fight to get to what equals happiness. And maybe someday that means owning a franchise for me as well. But these are things that I think about that I think are super relevant, and ultimately all of the answers to franchising after you've had the check mark of, yes, this is a good business opportunity, and yes, we're supporting our franchisees, and yes, we're building this business with integrity. When all that is check mark, then it comes down to people trying to make each other feel comfortable and help guide them to whatever this outcome is that we want in this life. So hopefully you got some sort of insight out of today. Again, I've said this before. My goal isn't to give you a million things to take away. It's to give you one. And if you walk away from this coffee and analytics and say, okay, that's one more thing that I could try doing to strengthen the foundation of what my franchise is and how I can get out there and get in front of the right person, then I win. So one thing, figure it out, whether it's the last message or it's part of the drip campaign. Hopefully you got some value out of today's discussion, and I'll see you in another month. I really enjoyed doing this. Have a great rest of the week. I'll see you later. It's Coffee Analytics.